Hey everyone, I've got a fun cash game hand to show you all today in PioSolver, and the reason it was so fun is because this is a button big blind situation where I defended my big blind in a high stakes cash game with Queen 7 off against the button open, and got the dream Queen 7-7 rainbow flop, which almost never happens. So, yeah, the way the hand actually played out, I check raised the flop. The turn was an ace, it put a flush draw. I bet, got called by my opponent. The river was offsuit 6, and I bet and got called. Looks like a pretty standard hand on its face, but I actually screwed this hand up pretty good, and I'm going to go through that with you guys today. And this hand highlights a lot of, I would say, extreme concepts in PioSolver land for Limit Hold'em. One is like the board texture that we particularly got, and the second is some big blocker effects and properties of this exact hand and this exact run out. So I thought it would make for a neat hand. It was also a memorable hand because I won a big pot, but it turns out I probably could have won a better one. So let's start at the start, which is after I check flop, which is pretty much where this hand really begins. And we can see villain has close to a range bet. Well, why is this? This is a good flop for villain. I have 3 bets out of the big blind in a button big blind situation, and so he's going to have a pretty strong equity advantage in this situation. I have only 40% equity, so whenever in position has 60% equity, we expect a very substantial range c-bet percentage. But there is a big contrast in things that are happening here because while I have a significant equity disadvantage with all my weak hands, I have a tremendous nut advantage because guess what? I have way more trips than villain does. So once he bets, we see something extreme in Solverland, and we've seen this in some of my other videos, but look at this flop strategy. I basically don't call. I basically raise or fold. And this sort of makes sense if you start to think about it. Look at all my junky hands that are just folding, all these medium and low cards, nothing above a king, nothing above a queen. And then, of course, I have this massive nut advantage in the sevens as we go left to right across the sevens and we go up and down across the sevens. All these combos that villain simply can never have. So I get to raise here a lot, even with a significant hot and cold equity disadvantage on the flop, because now I'm folding all my bad hands, so I just get to start fast playing my good hands. And as a result of that, I do some weird check raising with a bunch of other hands that sort of all have different purposes for what they're trying to achieve. A lot of my hands are just trying to get value, protect my hand. I mean, when you check raise a king high on this flop, you're mostly thinking your hand is good. You're not really trying to get a better hand to fold. You also end up having a sneaky, interesting hand on different runouts and different textures. And then there's a bunch of bluffing hands that are just leveraging the nut advantage I have to go for some kind of really extreme backdoor bluffs. Look at this 6-4 suited combo, for example, basically pure check raising when I have a backdoor flush draw. The interaction with the 7 is relevant here. I can pick up straight draws on the turn. And when you have such an extreme flop strategy, you're also going to have a mix on most turn cards. So, really I got this part right, not a big deal. But let's look what happens when the ace comes on the turn. What do you think is going to happen when ace hits on the turn here? This is an interesting card, right? Because both players have a lot of ace highs. You can imagine villain's going to continue on this flop with all of his ace highs, which he has a sizable number of. And we can see that I'm actually going to have a lot of ace highs in my flop check raising range as well. So let's take a look. Okay, so interesting situation here developing on the turn. Notice how often I check the turn, first off. I'm mostly actually checking my range here because I have all sorts of hands that don't really like the ace, right? I have all those queen X, which makes up a sizable portion of my range that all fast played flop. And I have a number of bluffs that some of which just need to start giving up, right? I'm not going to necessarily get to just barrel off mindlessly here with, hands like 8-5 of clubs. It's mixing in some bluffs, but I'm just going to have way too many bluffs if I'm barreling here. And these king-high hands have less incentive to be bluffing now. So, on the other hand, all my ace-X look pretty interested in betting. Why? Well, one, villain doesn't have trips very often. We've already established that he just can have a 7 not that often in his range. And two, I'm basically chopping against any other ace-X, so, except for ace-king and ace-queen. So my ace-X aren't really very afraid here, and they want to get value against his weaker holdings. They want to get value against his queen-X, his pocket pairs. Some of his king-highs are definitely going to have to continue here. I still find some bluffs. I am not, totally giving up here. These 6-5 suited combos, I pick up flush draws. A lot of my spades are almost always going to barrel this turn. I have random hands still like jack-10 off that's basically trying to bluff king-high. So, we're not done bluffing here, and all of our ace-X are pretty comfortable value betting in this situation. But this is where I started to screw the hand up. Let's look at the actual hand that I held, the Queen 7. Notice of all of the 7s in the row here that are mixing, Queen 7 is betting the least. If you stop to think about it, which I clearly did not do in game, this makes sense. I block the hand that I want to get called by. I block the queen. If villain has an ace, he's simply going to call my bet, being afraid of the trips. We can see that that's the case. If I bet villain never raises a single ace here, the weakest hand that he even considers raising is ace queen, and it's mixing. So if that's the case, my queen 7 is really only going to get one bet in against all those ace x's that he can hold, and I would much rather check and go ahead and check raise him. Now, EV wise, it's not that big of a difference. We're only looking at like a dollar out of 100, 1% difference here on the turn, because both lines are very good. I have one of those good problems in poker. I have a monster hand, and pretty much any way I play it outside of folding is going to make me a bunch of money. But it is interesting to note that the blocker effects of my exact hand make it very likely that queen 7 should check. Notice ace 7 is pure betting for the exact opposite reason. Now, villain has way less ace x, and he's not going to bet any queen x if I check the turn. So this hand just wants to go ahead and bet and get called by a queen x. Notice if we check, villain's strategy is also pretty simplistic and straightforward. He's betting his trips for pure value. He's never slow playing in a check-check situation. He's betting some of his ace x, but some of them are being a little cautious here. He's probably thinking, well, I'm kind of polarized in this situation. Why would I need to open the action against a range that's basically often folding or raising me? And that is indeed the case. If he does bet, we do fold a decent amount of those bluffs that we gave up with. It does turn out we have a number of hands that can call with, which are these queen x combos. And it also turns out that we even throw in some slow plays here after checking the turn. So I would never have in-game thought about check calling with queen 7 off on the turn. But again, it makes a little bit of sense. If I go ahead and check raise here, then villain's going to call down with ace x. I'm going to win 3 big bets total across the 2 big bet streets. I'm going to win 2 on the turn and 1 on the river. If I check and call, villain is going to bet the river with ace x basically no matter what. He really doesn't have any incentive to check. He still wants to target all of these queen x and weaker holdings that I can have. So if I just check call and the river is kind of even whatever, even if it's like a suited card like a spade that comes in, notice the villain's not going to be at all afraid to bet his ace x for value here. So I never lose any value with my queen 7 against that part of his range. Now I'll just go ahead and spring my trap, and that'll be the case on any river, of course. I mean, these hands are all monstrous. These trips that slow played the turn are certainly going for value here. And, villain has the same sort of decision he did if I check raise the turn, which is like his ace x now are 0 EV bluff catchers, and some of them are folding and some of them are going to cry and call to try to pick off bluffs. And if we go back and see me check raise on the turn, it's going to be the exact same thing. His ace x are doing a little bit better here, but I have some reasons to protect my range in this situation. So that is the part of the hand where I started to screw up. I never would have found a check call with queen 7 in game. I might have considered a check raise. I guess I should have considered that. But there's one more way I screwed up this hand, and it's even more substantial, which is, let's say I do bet the turn. Notice what our turn betting range looks like. Again, we have all these ace x. We have a lot of ace x. We have a little bit of 7x. We have some 7x. And then we have some random bluffs, some weak holdings, some small pairs, and just a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We bet. Villain calls with all his ace x. Let's say in the game the river was an offsuit 6. Let's just use that. Notice that we do go ahead and fire the third barrel 70% of the time. All my ace x still have plenty of incentive to bet. Again, I'm not really worried about anything. Notice villain does also have some slow plays. In fact, queen 7 suited basically never put in a raise. So he has kind of the exact same incentives that I do, which is he's going to collect a bet on every street from ace x anyway, so he wants to protect his range. But one thing I wanted to point out here is look at my queen 7 now. I have messed it up a little bit already on the turn, but now on the river, the solver wants to check raise my hand a ton. All of a sudden now it's an $8 or $9 out of 100 mistake to bet my hand on the river. So this is a pretty big, really mistake for such a good holding to have to not clearly recognize that villain basically has ace x or nothing when I hold the queen 7. I can collect an extra bet from that hand if I check. Of course, you can think about exploit reasons to maybe go a different route. If your opponents are very nitty and passive, then obviously just bet your hand. But in GTO land, if I check, villain is very happily betting all of his ace x. I guess we shouldn't say all. He bets most of his ace x, and as a result, I'm very happy to go ahead and collect a check raise on the river with my queen 7. Kind of an interesting river strategy for me here, where I basically had a bunch of bluffs that I'm now giving up with. I'll remember those jack 10s that we talked about earlier, and I have some king highs that are basically indifferent that can now pick off a bluff from his missed flush draws, things like that. I even make a pair with a 6 on the end and I'm tempted to cry and call to pick off bluffs myself. And then I have all these trips that played funny and go for a check raise here on the river. So I have no ace x. Notice that my range does not include ace x. I never would have played ace x this way. So some very, very substantial magnified blocker effects in this hand where because if I hold a queen in my hand or if I hold an ace in my hand, it has a massive, massive impact on my strategy choice. And that's something I did not think about very clearly in game. I just went with the greedy line, which made sure to put money in on every street. And it turns out this would have been a little bit more of an interesting spot to throw in some slow plays and some mix-up plays on that particular turn card. Don't know what villain had. I bet the river he called I won. So, probably he did have ace-x. It's a little hard to say, but obviously that's a massive part of his range. So, yeah, thought I would share this hand with you guys today. Even in a spot where I had a great hand and won a reasonable pot, we can see some mistakes and some spots where I could have thought a little bit more clearly about my actions and my exact hand combination. And I thought that was pretty cool to see. And let me know what you guys think. I'll see you guys in the comments.